In a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other by name, there lived a man who seemed to have it all figured out. He was an average guy working as an accountant at a well-known company, living in a cozy house with his wife and two kids, and leading what most people would call a simple but happy life. But appearances can be deceiving. Deep inside, this man felt stuck. He dreamed of bigger things, nicer cars, fancier vacations, and a lifestyle far beyond what his paycheck could afford. And one day, he saw an opportunity that made him think he could finally break free from the monotony. It started innocently enough, or so he told himself. While going through some files for a wealthy client, he noticed something odd. There was a tiny loophole in the system, a little crack in the armor of the company's finances. It wasn't anything major, not at first glance anyway. But to someone like him, who spent hours crunching numbers and understanding how these systems worked, it stood out like a neon sign. At first, he hesitated. What if I get caught? He thought, but then doubt crept in. No one will notice, another voice whispered back. That's when the idea took root. What if he could move just a little bit of money around? Just a few $100s here and there. No one would miss it, right? So he decided to test the waters. One late night, after everyone had gone home, he sat at his desk, heart pounding, and made the first transfer. It was quick, almost too easy. By morning, no alarms went off. No one came knocking on his door. Everything seemed fine. Encouraged by his success, he did it again, and again. Each time, the amounts grew larger. Soon, he wasn't just moving hundreds, he was shuffling thousands into secret accounts under fake names. These accounts were hidden, overseas, places where no one would think to look unless they really dug deep. At first, he promised himself he'd stop once he had enough to feel secure, but greed is a tricky thing. The more he took, the more he wanted. Pretty soon, he found himself living a double life. On the surface, nothing changed. He still wore the same suits, drove the same car, and greeted his coworkers with the same friendly smile every morning. But behind closed doors, things were different. His family started noticing new gadgets lying around the house, expensive clothes hanging in the closet, and vacations planned to destinations they'd only seen in magazines. When his wife asked where the extra cash was coming from, he shrugged it off. Overtime, he said casually. Some bonuses I didn't tell you about. But while his bank balance swelled, so did his anxiety. Every knock on the door sent his heart racing. Every phone call made him jump. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching. Still, nothing happened. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Life went on. As usual, or so it seemed. What he didn't realize was that his actions were setting off a chain reaction, one that would eventually catch up to him in ways he never imagined. Little did he know, someone else had started noticing inconsistencies in the very accounts he had tampered with. Someone who wouldn't let it slide. For now, though, he remained blissfully unaware, basking in the illusion of invincibility. After all, he had convinced himself of one thing: he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he could get away with it, and maybe, just maybe, he was right for now. But as history has shown us time and again, the truth has a funny way of coming to light when you least expect it. The cracks in the perfect plan began to show slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with a new face in the office, a young auditor who had just joined the team. She was sharp, detail-oriented, and didn't miss much. Her arrival went largely unnoticed by most people, but for the man stealing from the company, her presence felt like a shadow looming over him. At first, she seemed harmless enough. She kept to herself, buried in spreadsheets and reports, occasionally asking questions during meetings. But then, one day, she stumbled upon something odd. While reviewing the same client accounts he had manipulated, she noticed numbers that didn't add up. Small discrepancies here and there, things that could easily be dismissed as typos or minor errors. Most people would have let it slide, chalked it up to human error, but not her. Something about the pattern bothered her. It wasn't random. It was too consistent. And consistency, in her line of work, often meant intent. Her curiosity turned into suspicion when she dug deeper. One night, after everyone else had left the office, she stayed late, combing through old records. That's when she found it, the trail of unexplained transfers tied to obscure entities. The names of these entities were strange, unfamiliar, and deliberately vague. They sounded like shell companies, fronts designed to hide money rather than conduct legitimate business. She jotted down notes, cross-referencing dates and amounts, piecing together a puzzle that painted an unsettling picture. Meanwhile, the man who thought he was untouchable grew increasingly uneasy. He hadn't expected anyone to pay such close attention to those accounts. For months, he'd operated under the assumption that no one cared enough to look closely. Now, with this new auditor sniffing around, his confidence began to waver. Every time she walked past his desk, every time their eyes met across the room, he felt a chill run down his spine. Was she onto him? Had she figured it out, or was he just being paranoid? His unease spilled over into his personal life. At home, he became distant, snapping at his wife over trivial matters and avoiding conversations about finances altogether. His kids noticed the change too. Why is Dad always so grumpy? They whispered to each other when he stormed out of the kitchen after dinner. Even his weekends, once filled with family outings and laughter, now felt tense and strained. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. Desperate to throw her off his trail, he decided to act fast. If she was suspicious, he needed to give her someone else to focus on, someone who wouldn't fight back too hard. His mind landed on a junior colleague, a quiet guy who had recently voiced frustrations about the company during lunch breaks. This guy had made comments about how unfair the system was, how some people got away with things while others struggled to keep up. To anyone listening, it sounded like bitterness, and bitterness, he realized, could easily be twisted into motive. So he planted evidence. Carefully, methodically, he created fake documents linking the junior colleague to the suspicious transactions. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. All it had to do was cast enough doubt to shift the spotlight away from him. When the auditor confronted management with her findings, they immediately launched an investigation not against him, but against the unsuspecting coworker. For a while it worked. The junior colleague was blindsided, accused of crimes he hadn't committed. He denied everything, of course, insisting he was innocent, but few people believed him. Management saw his protests as defensiveness, his frustration as guilt. As the investigation dragged on, the man allowed himself a moment of relief. He had bought himself more time. Or so he thought, but guilt has a way of eating away at you, even if you try to ignore it. Late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, he would sit alone in the dark, staring at photos of his family. Memories of happier times flooded his mind: birthdays, holidays, lazy Sunday mornings spent laughing together. How long could he keep lying to them? How long before the truth came out and destroyed everything he held dear? One evening, his wife cornered him in the living room. She had been observing his behavior for weeks, noticing the sudden mood swings, the evasiveness whenever she asked about their finances. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "Where is all this money coming from?" He froze, caught off guard. For a second, he considered telling her the truth, confessing everything and begging for forgiveness. The pride and fear got the better of him. Instead, he lied again, brushing her concerns aside with vague excuses. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Just work stuff. Don't worry about it." But his words rang hollow, even to his own ears. She didn't press further, but the hurt in her eyes said it all. She knew something was wrong. And though she didn't say it aloud, he could see the trust between them crumbling, piece by fragile piece. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. The auditor wasn't satisfied with the outcome of the investigation. Despite the accusations against the junior colleague, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. She kept digging, following leads that others had overlooked, determined to uncover the full story. Meanwhile, the man who thought he was safe found himself trapped in a web of his own making, each thread tightening around him until escape seemed impossible. Little did he know, the worst was yet to come. The first domino fell when the junior colleague, who had been falsely accused, refused to back down. Most people in his position would have crumbled under the weight of suspicion, but not him. He was determined to clear his name, no matter what it took. With nothing left to lose, he hired Alira, a sharp, no-nonsense woman known for taking on tough cases and winning. Together, they demanded access to every document, every record, and every shred of evidence tied to the investigation. They weren't going to let this go quietly. Back at the office, the atmosphere grew tense. Whispers filled the hallways as employees debated who was telling the truth. Some believed the accusations against the junior colleague. Others thought he was being set up. Meanwhile, the auditor who had initially raised the red flag found herself caught in the middle. She hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. Her goal had never been to destroy someone's life. She simply wanted answers. But now, with the junior colleague fighting back and management scrambling to contain the situation, the stakes felt higher than ever. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing old files late one night, she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. Hidden deep within layers of transactions were links to offshore accounts that didn't belong to the junior colleague. At first glance, the names attached to these accounts seemed random, almost meaningless. But when she traced them further, she discovered something shocking. They led straight to the man everyone trusted. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. It couldn't be true, could it? The same person who had always been so friendly, so helpful, so reliable, was he really behind all of this? She double-checked her findings, triple-checked them, and then checked again. There was no denying it. The evidence was undeniable, but exposing the truth wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't just any employee. This was someone who had worked at the company for years, someone respected by colleagues and management alike. Reporting him meant risking backlash not just from him, but from the entire organization. People didn't like having their trust shaken, especially when it came to someone they admired. Still, she knew she couldn't stay silent. Ignoring the truth would make her complicit, and that was something she couldn't live with. She gathered her notes, organized the evidence, and scheduled a meeting with senior management. Walking into the room, she felt a mix of fear and determination. Fear because she didn't know how they would react, and determination because she knew she was doing the right thing. She laid out her findings calmly but firmly, pointing out every inconsistency, every link, every piece of proof that pointed to the betrayal. At first, the managers were reluctant to believe her. "Are you sure about this?" one of them asked, frowning. "This is serious. If we accuse someone without solid evidence, we could ruin their career and ours." She nodded, understanding their hesitation. But she also reminded them of the bigger picture. "If we ignore this," she said, quietly, "we're not just protecting him. We're endangering the company. And if word gets out that we look the other way, our reputation will be gone." Reluctantly, they agreed to investigate further. A formal meeting was called, and the accused was summoned to explain himself. Sitting across the table from his bosses, he tried to maintain his composure, but sweat beaded on his forehead. When confronted with the evidence, he stammered, denied, and shifted blame first onto the junior colleague again, then onto vague system errors that supposedly caused the discrepancies. But his excuses sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The more he spoke, the more obvious it became that he was lying. Finally, cornered and desperate, he broke down. In a trembling voice, he confessed not out of guilt or remorse, but because he saw no other way out. He admitted to everything: the stolen money, the fake accounts, the lies. His confession sent shockwaves through the company. Employees who had once looked up to him now avoided eye contact, unable to reconcile the man. They thought they knew with the reality of his actions. News of the scandal spread quickly, rippling far beyond the walls of the office. Clients began pulling out, fearing their funds might not be safe. Partners questioned whether they could continue working with a company that had allowed such fraud to happen. The firm's reputation, once rock solid, started crumbling like sandcastles in the tide. For the man at the center of the storm, the fallout was immediate and devastating. He was arrested, his face plastered across newspapers and TV screens. Overnight, he went from being a respected professional to a cautionary tale. At home, the impact was equally brutal. His wife, who had suspected something was wrong but never imagined it was this bad, sat in stunned silence as the full scope of his betrayal sank in. Their marriage, already strained, collapsed under the weight of his lies. She filed for divorce, unable to forgive him for risking everything they had built together. Their children, confused and heartbroken, struggled to understand why their father had done something so selfish and reckless. Family dinners turned into tearful arguments, laughter replaced by silence. As for the auditor, her decision to speak up earned her both praise and criticism. Some colleagues thanked her for uncovering the truth, while others resented her for rocking the boat. Management promoted her, recognizing her integrity and dedication. But despite the recognition, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. She had always believed in justice, but seeing the human cost of it, the shattered lives, the broken trust left her questioning whether anything was worth the price. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. The junior colleague, finally cleared of all charges, returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. He vowed to use his experience to help others facing similar injustices. The company, though battered, began implementing stricter safeguards to prevent future scandals. And the man who had thought he could get away with it? Well, he was about to learn that actions have consequences, and that redemption, if it comes at all, often requires more than apologies. For now, though, the world watched and waited, wondering what lessons would be learned from this story of greed, betrayal, and the inevitable unraveling of lies. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a heavy blanket. The man who had once thought he was untouchable now sat in the defendant's chair, dressed in clothes that didn't fit quite right. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold himself together. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything that had happened. Across the room, the prosecutor stood up, ready to deliver the final blow. The judge listened carefully as the charges were read aloud: fraud, embezzlement, forgery. The list went on and on. Each word felt like another nail being hammered into a coffin. When it was time for the sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. "This isn't just about money," he said, his voice firm but tinged with disappointment. "It's about trust. You betrayed your colleagues, your family, and most importantly, yourself. Actions have consequences, and yours will follow you for the rest of your life." The sentence came down hard: several years in prison, fines that would take decades to pay off, and a permanent mark on his record that would haunt him long after he was released. For a moment, the man just stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. There was no dramatic outburst, no angry denial, just a hollow silence. It was over. Everything he had worked for, everything he had risked, had crumbled into dust. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees, shouting questions and snapping photos. But none of that mattered anymore. Inside, behind bars, he found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time in years. No distractions, no excuses, just the cold reality of what he had done. At first, he tried to blame others, the system, bad luck, even the junior colleague he had framed, but those excuses rang hollow even to him. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether, retreating into himself as the days dragged on. Prison wasn't easy. The food was bland, the beds uncomfortable, and the walls felt like they were closing in. But the hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the loneliness. Letters from home stopped coming after a while. His wife had moved on, taking the kids with her. Friends he thought would stand by him disappeared, unwilling to associate with someone labeled a criminal. Even his own parents struggled to visit, their faces etched with shame and sadness every time they saw him. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Maybe it was the long nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that led him here. Or maybe it was the conversations he started having with other inmates, men who had made mistakes far worse than his, yet still carried glimmers of hope for redemption. Whatever it was, he began to see things differently. He realized that while he couldn't change the past, he could try to make amends, not for forgiveness, but because it was the right thing to do. He started volunteering in the prison's education program, helping inmates learn basic math and financial literacy. Many of them had fallen into trouble because they didn't understand how money worked, how easy it was to spiral into debt or make poor decisions when desperate. Teaching them gave him a sense of purpose, a small reminder that he still had something to offer despite everything he'd lost. Slowly, he earned their respect, not as the guy who stole millions, but as someone willing to help without judgment. Back in the outside world, life moved on without him. His wife rebuilt hers brick by brick, finding strength she never knew she had. She took on extra shifts at work, leaned on friends for support, and focused on raising her children in a stable environment. It wasn't easy, but she refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she chose resilience, teaching her kids valuable lessons about honesty, responsibility, and the importance of making good choices, even when it's hard. As for the auditor, who uncovered the truth, her career skyrocketed. Her courage and integrity became the talk of the industry, earning her promotions and accolades. Yet she remained humble, always reminding herself why she had spoken up in the first place. "It's not about fame or recognition," she told a reporter during an interview. "It's about doing what's right even when it scares you." Her story inspired others to speak out against wrongdoing, proving that one person's actions can spark real change. Years passed, and eventually the man was granted parole. Walking out of the gates on his first day of freedom, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The world outside looked different, now brighter, louder, faster. Technology had advanced, businesses had changed, and people seemed to move with a sense of urgency he hadn't noticed before. He wondered where he fit in, if there was any place left for him in a society that had moved on without him. His first stop was a small cafe near the bus station. Over coffee, he pulled out a notebook filled with ideas he had jotted down during his time in prison. Plans for workshops, community programs, anything that might help others avoid the pitfalls he had fallen into. He knew rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he owed it to the people he had hurt to try. In the months that followed, he reached out to former colleagues, apologizing sincerely for the pain he had caused. Some accepted his apology. Others slammed the door in his face. Either way, he kept going, determined to face the consequences of his actions head-on. He began speaking at schools and community centers, sharing his story not as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson in accountability. "I messed up," he would say, looking directly at his audience. "Big time. And I'm paying for it every single day, but I'm also learning. Learning that greed doesn't solve problems, it creates them. That shortcuts always come with a price. And that honesty, even when it's painful, is the only path worth walking." Not everyone believed him. Some called him a fraud, saying his newfound remorse was just an act. Others dismissed his efforts as too little, too late. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he saw glimpses of understanding in someone's eyes. A teenager nodding thoughtfully during one of his talks. A parent thanking him for warning their child about the dangers of cutting corners. Those moments, though rare, gave him hope. Meanwhile, the company he had once worked for emerged stronger from the scandal. New policies were put in place to prevent similar incidents, and transparency became a cornerstone of its operations. Employees, wary at first, slowly regained trust in leadership. And though the memory of the betrayal lingered, it served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and integrity. For the man who had once thought he could get away with it, life was far from perfect. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant effort and humility. But as he looked back on everything that had happened, the lies, the greed, the fallout, he realized something important. The truth may have turned the tables on him, but it had also given him a chance to start over. Not with a clean slate, but with a deeper understanding of what truly matters: honesty, accountability, and the courage to face the consequences of your choices. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Years had passed since the man walked out of prison, blinking in the bright sunlight, unsure of what lay ahead. Life on the outside wasn't easy, but it was a second chance, one he knew he didn't deserve, but one he intended to make the most of. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between his past mistakes and the fragile hope of building something better. It wasn't glamorous or heroic, just quiet determination, step by step. At first, finding work was nearly impossible. No matter how polished his resume looked or how sincere his apologies sounded, the stain of his crimes followed him everywhere. Potential employers would nod politely during interviews, only to reject him later with vague excuses. "We'll be in touch," they'd say. Though he knew they wouldn't, rejection after rejection wore him down, but instead of giving up, he decided to carve his own path. He started small, offering free financial advice to people in low income, neighborhoods, people who couldn't afford fancy accountants but desperately needed help managing their money. Word spread slowly. At first, it was just a few curious neighbors showing up at community centers where he volunteered. Then came referrals from social workers and local nonprofits. People began to trust him not because they forgot what he had done, but because they saw the effort he was putting into making things right. His sessions weren't lectures. They were conversations. He shared stories from his own life, the good, the bad, and especially the ugly, hoping others might learn from his mistakes. "Money can trick you," he'd say, leaning forward in his chair. "It makes promises it can't keep. It tells you that if you have more, you'll be happier. But I'm here to tell you, it doesn't work like that. Greed eats away at everything until there's nothing left." The room would grow quiet as listeners absorbed his words. Some nodded knowingly, while others scribbled notes. Determined not to repeat his errors, outside of these workshops he kept busy volunteering wherever he could. Food banks, shelters, youth mentoring programs, he showed up early and stayed late, always willing to lend a hand. These acts of service didn't erase his guilt, but they gave him purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like he was contributing something positive to the world, even if it was just in small ways. His relationship with his family remained complicated. His ex-wife had remarried, building a new life with someone who treated her kids like his own. They were happy now, and though it stung to see them move on without him, he understood. He couldn't blame her for wanting stability, for choosing someone reliable over someone reckless. Still, he tried to stay connected to his children, sending letters and occasionally meeting them for coffee when they agreed to see him. Their meetings were awkward at first, filled with long silences and forced smiles. Over time, however, they began opening up, asking questions about why he had done what he did. He answered honestly, never sugarcoating the truth. "I thought I was smarter than everyone else," he admitted during one such conversation. "But I wasn't. I was selfish and stupid, and I hurt people I cared about, including you." It wasn't an easy thing to hear, but they appreciated his honesty. Forgiveness didn't come overnight. It might never fully arrive, but understanding did. And sometimes that was enough. The company he once worked for continued to thrive, its reputation restored thanks to stricter safeguards and transparent practices. Occasionally he heard updates through mutual acquaintances, snippets of news about promotions, mergers, and awards. He felt a pang of loss whenever he heard these stories, not because he wanted to return, but because he missed being part of something meaningful. Yet he reminded himself that he had forfeited that privilege. What mattered now was moving forward, not looking back. One evening, while volunteering at a shelter, he ran into the auditor who had uncovered his crimes. She was there serving meals alongside other volunteers, her sleeves rolled up and a warm smile on her face. When she saw him, she hesitated for a moment before approaching. "How are you doing?" she asked, her tone neutral but not unkind. He shrugged, offering a wry smile. "Better than I deserve, honestly. Trying to fix some of the mess I made." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That takes guts," she said simply. "Not many people would have the courage to do that." Her words caught him off guard, and for a brief second, he felt a flicker of pride, not for what he had done, but for how far he had come. They chatted briefly before returning to their tasks, the encounter leaving both of them with a sense of closure. Neither held any illusions about rewriting history, but perhaps they could coexist in this new reality. each working toward a brighter future in their own way. As the years went by, the man became a familiar figure in the community. People recognized him not as the disgraced accountant who stole millions, but as someone who had fallen hard and fought his way back. He wasn't perfect, no one expected him to be, but he was genuine. That authenticity earned him respect. Even from those who initially doubted him, looking back on his journey, he realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. You couldn't undo the damage caused by greed or betrayal. What you could do was acknowledge your mistakes, take responsibility, and commit to becoming someone better. It wasn't a quick fix or a magic solution. It was hard, messy, and often painful. But it was worth it. On a chilly autumn afternoon, he stood in front of a crowd at a local high school, sharing his story with students. As he spoke, he noticed a girl in the front row scribbling furiously in her notebook. Afterward, she approached him shyly, clutching the paper tightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've been thinking about dropping out of school because I feel stuck. But hearing you talk, it gave me hope." He smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "Hope is powerful," he replied. "Hold on to it tightly, okay? And remember, no matter how tough things get, you can always choose to start again." As he walked away, he glanced at the sky, painted orange and pink by the setting sun. Life wasn't fair, and it certainly wasn't easy. But it was full of chances if you were brave enough to take them. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with the road ahead.